Well, this is Dateline News and Conversation. My guest is no stranger to the show. He's my good friend. Uh, he's absolutely one of the best journalists around today. He doesn't just speculate from an armchair in his home in Greece. He goes to where the action is: Iran, Lebanon, Palestine, Gaza, Israel. Tonight, Dimitri, I have to tell you, for the first time, amidst all this conflict that's been going on between Ukraine and now Iran, I have to admit I'm a little uncomfortable. Trump appears to be baffled, befuddled, confused. He is more erratic now than we've ever seen him, in my opinion. I don't like to watch these clips, these news clips where he's talking to people and he's incoherent. He's not connected. He doesn't seem to be aware of how difficult a position he's in. Dimitri, I'm going to let you comment and begin wherever you want, but I'm just going to give this overview. Trump goes to China with, I don't know, a dozen or so of the top business CEO executives in the United States. I don't know what he expected to do. There obviously was no preparation of documents or statements that they would have agreed to. Nothing at all. He went home, basically, I think, empty-handed. Now, you also know that Iran had visited China. All of this in the last month. And then Russia goes to China. And unlike Trump, his visit was a love fest. I don't know how else you could describe it. He goes home with 40 signed agreements covering everything from joint collaboration in culture, technology, development, and military. And then, Dimitri, Trump is having to deal with Iran. I think this guy probably doesn't sleep very well at night. He now is threatening Iran again, and Iran is saying, bring it on. If you do it this time, you're going to face a completely new attack. And that attack could also be on you. I've seen a couple of reports that seem to indicate that Iran has threatened to attack Donald Trump personally where he lives. And then, Dimitri, there's the situation in Iran. And I want you to comment on that as well. 2 days ago, Ukraine, and let me back up. It's not Ukraine that's firing those drones and missiles deep into Russia. It's the United States behind the vassals in France, Ukraine, who are actually firing, guiding those attacks. And the most recent one, Dimitri, remarkable, like the attack that the United States did on that school and killed 177 kids and their teachers. They just attacked a school in a dormitory in Lugansk, in the Donbass. I don't know. The number of dead is rising. I think it's around 20 now. Another 50 at least have been injured. And Dimitri, Putin came out immediately and he promised revenge. Dimitri, take it wherever you want to go, but I don't know about you. I'm really concerned. I'm a little bit disturbed. Tell me what your thoughts are as this past month has unfolded with these diplomatic efforts and simultaneously threats of another attack on Iran, and then what just happened in the Donbass 2 days ago. Your thoughts?
First of all, thank you, Regis, for those very, very kind words. You're always too kind when you bring me onto your program with your praise. I really do appreciate it. And I'm just one of many people working in the field these days, trying to get the truth out. Let me start with the situation in Ukraine. About 2 days after the most recent massive Ukrainian drone strikes on Moscow, I published a piece on my own channel, Reason to Resist, where for the very first time in this conflict, which I've been watching carefully from the very beginning, I've been commenting extensively, reporting on it, as you know, because I met you there. I came to Crimea in 2023. It was the first time I'd ever actually been to Russia. I also spent a good bit of time in Moscow, and I traveled from Moscow to Crimea by train. You took me around with your lovely partner around Crimea. This is a conflict which, from a journalistic perspective and from a human perspective, I felt was very, very important to cover. And I had never, during that entire time, until I published that piece on my own channel 1 or 2 days after the massive drone attack on Moscow, suggested that the Russian military would be ordered to strike a target inside a European NATO member. And in that piece that I published, I said not only did I think it was possible, but that it was in fact inevitable now, because the attacks have escalated to the point where they are inflicting significant damage on the energy sector in Russia. Even before this criminal terrorist attack on the student dormitory in Lugansk, the Ukrainians were killing civilians by striking civilian infrastructure, and including in the attack on Moscow. There were videos published circulating widely of a number of those drones striking high-rise apartment buildings. And a woman was killed in her own home in, I think the village is called Kamenki, north of Moscow, in that attack. And it had gotten to the point where I felt that, in combination with what the escalation, the attacks on Russia going deeper and deeper into Russian territory, more and more civilians being killed in attacks on civilian infrastructure, larger and larger drone strikes. We have the developments in the Persian Gulf, where the Iranians have demonstrated remarkably well that they can strike not only the military bases and infrastructure, energy infrastructure of states that are closely allied with the United States in the region, but U.S. military bases themselves. And as the corporate media in the United States have reported over the last few weeks, the attacks by Iran on these U.S. military bases have rendered most of them unusable. This is the word that the U.S. media have been using, and therefore, I inferred from all of this, for all of these reasons, that the pressure was increasing enormously on the Russian president to order strikes on a European member of NATO, probably targeting infrastructure that is used inside European NATO countries to build weaponry for Ukraine. And then came Trump's trip to China, followed quickly by, as you mentioned, Vladimir Putin's trip to China. And at the end of the China summit, they put out a dramatic statement which decried the descent into what they described as the law of the jungle. And many people, I think with some justification, interpreted this as a historic statement and essentially as a declaration by China and Russia that they would stand together against the degradation of international law and the increasing use of unilateral force and outright savagery by the United States and its vassals. Then came the strike on the dormitory. Just, I think, less than 48 hours later. And, it is eerily familiar, even though the death toll, I just checked, it's 18, according to the Russian government, have been killed. More people, I understand, are missing. Dozens, as you mentioned, have been wounded. When I saw the images and the video of the strike, it did very much remind me of Minab. And it's very clear that that was not an errant drone.
Yeah.
They used different types of weapons, the craters, the collapsed frame of the building. They were not only using drones, they were either using missiles or bombs or both. The Russian government reported that the projectiles came in waves. So this is clearly a target. It was intended to be struck. The intelligence capabilities of these countries supporting Ukraine are such that they must have known it was a school. And I think they're sending a message. And the message is, we don't care about your partnership with China. We don't care about your declaration to, end the descent into the law of the jungle. Here's our answer. We will continue to escalate until you are destroyed or you capitulate. So I now think, as you well know, the Russian president then ordered the military to give the government options for retaliation. I now believe more than ever that a strike on a European member NATO is inevitable. People within Russia must be asking themselves, I ask myself this question, and I'm not Russian, how is it that Iran, which doesn't have a nuclear deterrent, is able to destroy multiple US military bases in the Persian Gulf and get away with it, but Russia, which has the most formidable nuclear arsenal in the world, can't even strike Latvia? Or, forget about US military bases. Russia hasn't even struck one of the Chihuahuas in the Baltics that have been warmongering against Russia and apparently allowing its airspace to be used to attack Russia with Ukrainian drones. I just don't see how the Russian president, for all of his restraint, which is completely understandable, can now resist the pressure to strike a European member of NATO. We've been kind of we're kind of like being whiplashed, between the events in Ukraine and the events in Persian Gulf. I now think that the real hot war may shift very quickly to Europe, where you and I are situated. And I have no hesitation in saying this is the most dangerous moment in the history of humanity.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I want to shift our attention to something you have mentioned. President Putin immediately publicly promised revenge. Now, the conversation here in the Russian Federation over the last month or so has been increasingly more hawkish. The hardliners, like one of the most influential people in Russia and in think tanks and in the Kremlin, a friend of Putin, Sergei Karaganov, has actually put forth the belief that Russia should use a strategic nuclear weapon on some place in the EU, an American base, a capital, whatever. Dmitry Medvedev, the former president of Russia, has been increasingly hawkish. He too is saying that this particular conflict, the special military operation, which has been showing restraint, characterized by the Russian military having to fight this special military operation with one arm tied behind their back. They and others are saying and agreeing with what you just said. This conflict has changed from a special military operation to the United States backing its Chihuahuas, as you said, vassals in NATO, the European countries, the Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And it is time to slap them really hard. On the other hand, my good friend, Andrew Korybko, an American who's been living in Russia, married with children, got his PhD from MGIMO, Moscow's premier university for diplomatic and foreign affairs, one of the best analysts that I think exists out there. He insisted to me today, Dmitry, that President Putin would not only not strike decision centers in Kiev, nor would he strike any American bases or anywhere in the EU. And this is what he said to me. He said, you know, last year, with that overwhelming attack on Moscow, including the attack on Putin's life in December of last year, he said Putin acted with restraint, and that he would do so this year as well. He said he thought he would just blow up a couple of manufacturing plants that produce weapons and drones, etc. Dmitry, I'm going to let you respond to that. My own feeling is this SMO has changed. It's no longer a war against Ukraine, a war of attrition, given what the United States is allowing to happen or making happen with its vassals who are conducting these, and they are missile attacks. I'm sure they're cruise missiles, as you mentioned, from the destruction. It's not a bunch of drones that are dropping a couple of bombs on these places. This is massive waves of incredibly lethal weapons. I don't know how Russia cannot recognize that this war has changed. And now, in my opinion, it's clear that it's a direct war with not only the EU, who are expressly preparing for war by 2030 by increasing their military production, trying to instill drafts across the EU, how Russia cannot recognize that this is a different situation. What are your thoughts?
The Russian military has already struck countless military-industrial facilities inside Ukraine. It even used an Oreshnik on twice. It's used Oreshniks to strike military-industrial facilities in Ukraine, and to devastating effect. And that did not deter the expansion of these strikes on Russia by Ukraine with the full backing of NATO. Since the use of the Oreshnik, the strikes have gone deeper. I think now they've gone even as far as 2,000 kilometers inside Russia, striking targets in the Ural Mountains. So they're in the strategic rear, and the strikes are getting, the drone swarms are getting larger. And as the Russian government itself has alleged, the drones are now passing through the airspace of Baltic states. They've openly accused the Baltic states of using the airspace. So the strikes on the military industrial centers inside Ukraine have not worked. They simply have not worked. And the problem is that I think most of this material is being manufactured outside of Ukraine. What effectively has happened is that the NATO Article 5 guarantee is immunizing the strategic rear of Ukraine. Effectively, Europe and the United States are the strategic rear of Ukraine. That's where they marshal forces, they train their forces, they build the material that's used to attack Russia, they gather the intelligence, and from there they supply the intelligence. So if you refuse to touch any of that, it gives Ukraine a huge advantage over Russia, because Russia's strategic rear is not immune. It was immune up until recently. Ukraine didn't have either the willingness or the capacity or both to strike deep inside Russia. But that's gone. That's over. It's absolutely crystal clear. They are willing to strike anywhere in Russia, and they have the capacity to get very, very deep into the strategic rear of Russia. So Russia can't continue fighting this war with one hand tied behind its back, refusing to attack the strategic rear of Ukraine, which is Europe and the United States, while its strategic rear is attacked with greater and greater frequency and efficacy. So I respectfully disagree with your colleague. I'd like to be wrong. In one sense, I'd like to be wrong because I know that that attack on a European member NATO may cause things to spiral out of control. But I'm also looking at the situation, the trajectory of this war. And it seems to me that if Russia doesn't take a much more dramatic step, it will escalate to the point that we will find ourselves in a nuclear war. So I don't know which is the more dangerous alternative for humanity. Russia's restraint or Russia now finally taking the gloves off. It's a difficult situation for the Russian president to be in, but I think they have forced his hand. They boxed him into a corner after he tried to avoid years sending Russian troops en masse into Ukraine. He did everything he could to avoid that. They boxed him in, and they've now boxed him in on the question of striking a European NATO member, in my opinion. And if he doesn't do it, someone else will. I mean, I think this is a real. He still has a high favorability rating, but I don't think the patience of the Russian people is infinite. At some point, they're going to demand that the leadership act.
The question that keeps coming up in my mind, Russia certainly being one of Iran's closest allies for a long time, they must have noticed the reaction of the United States to its military bases becoming, as you said, unusable, basically destroyed. And there was no reaction yet from the United States to bomb Ukraine back to the Stone Age, although Trump is still threatening that. And, I'm living in Russia, and I've been very supportive of President Putin, the strategy of the special military operation, the restraint. But I believe, like a lot of people, Sergei Karaganov and Dmitry Medvedev and lots of others now, including people, seem to believe that this is no longer a special military operation, that the purpose of this is now clear: to inflict a strategic, overwhelming defeat on Russia, which means to decapitate Putin, as they did in Venezuela, as they did in Iran, as they're about to do, or as they did about to do in Cuba with Raul Castro. It's clear what the United States or whoever is controlling it is intent on doing. And is Russia really afraid that if they attack a United States military base anywhere on their borders, Finland, for example, Sweden, the Baltics, Poland, are they really afraid that the United States would invoke Article 5 and protect any of these chihuahuas, as you say? Dmitry, I don't know. I think that Russia probably would feel pretty safe in attacking, not with a nuke, not with a strategic nuke, but any one of their Orezhniks, hypersonic missiles that the West and America has no defense for. What are your thoughts? Do you think the United States would back up any of these countries and risk what we're talking about? What you're talking about, what I believe we've been close to for a dozen years now, nuclear war.
I think it's important to remember the precise terms of Article 5 of the NATO treaty before we delve into your very important question, Regis. What it says, I'm reading it. The parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all, and consequently they agree that if such an armed attack occurs, each of them, in exercise of the right of individual or collective self-defense recognized by Article 151 of the Charter of the United Nations, will assist the party or parties so attacked by taking forthwith, individually and in concert with the other parties, such action as it deems necessary, including the use of armed force to restore and maintain the security of the North Atlantic area. So the key words are such action as it deems necessary, it being the state in question. So each state has to exercise its own judgment about what action is necessary. And secondly, this Article 5 refers to Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations, which refers to the right of self-defense in the case of an act of aggression. So first of all, it's clear from this article, the key Article 5, that every country has the discretion to decide what it views as necessary to defend the collectivity. But secondly, it presupposes there's been a violation of Article 51. If, in fact, these states are, I mean, it's absolutely clear that these states are arming Ukraine, providing intelligence to Ukraine, and possibly also allowing their territory and airspace to be used to attack Russia. Russia's strike on a NATO member, especially if it's targeting a specific facility that is used to facilitate attacks against Russia or to produce military equipment for Ukraine, would not be a violation of Article 51. It would be an act of self-defense by Russia, responding to acts of aggression from a NATO member. So there's wiggle room here. This is the key point I want to make. If the United States wants to mount an argument that it isn't obliged to strike Russia, it would certainly have such an argument available to it. And if it's acting rationally, Regis, this is the problem. This is the key thing here. If it's acting rationally, it won't strike Russia. It'll say, we pushed Russia to do this. Russia has a legitimate argument under Article 51 that it had to do this to defend itself. We aren't going to sacrifice our citizens, our country, the whole of humanity to defend some NATO chihuahua in Europe, which foolishly got itself in too deep. But you never know when you're dealing with these people. This is the problem. Will they act rationally? We should all be very concerned about that. At the end of the day, by the way, I don't think that Trump will make the decision. I don't really think that Trump is a real decision maker when it comes to matters of, involving the strategic interests of the United States. There is a very powerful elite standing behind Donald Trump. He is more or less a front man. He is dangerous, to be sure. I don't want to suggest he has no power. But when it comes to the decision whether or not to strike back at Russia, I think the real decision makers are going to weigh in. It'll include the oligarchs, people in the deep state, and they will make that decision. And probably, I repeat, probably they will have the good sense not to strike Russia directly in retaliation. But even they have proven themselves to be extremely aggressive. But again, we have to weigh up what is worse. What is more dangerous? Is it more dangerous for Russia to allow this to continue and to escalate and to put itself in a position where it's on the verge of being crippled, in which case the Karaganov argument that they should use nukes will become much more compelling? Or is it more dangerous for Russia to strike now with a conventional weapon and to limit itself to one or two military industrial targets in Eastern Europe?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I agree with you, and you made a couple of really important points. And the one thing I want to mention right now, Dimitri, what differentiates you from all of the blogosphere, all of the so-called experts sitting in their armchairs, speculating, getting hundreds of thousands of views within an hour. Doesn't matter whose channel they're on. You have been going to the center of where the conflict is. You've been doing this now for the last couple of years since you established your Substack channel, Reason to Resist. And you have been out there in front, interviewing people from all over the spectrum. But I wanted to point out that you are an attorney, a very successful attorney who's now retired. And the difference between you and most of the rest of them is your law background. The way you basically depend on what is observable, what is evidence, and what is clear. It's not wild speculation like the rest of them. I just had to get that out there. I should have mentioned it in the beginning. And I don't mean to just lay out these pious platitudes about you, but people need to understand that you are really a cut above everything else that's going on. Now, I want to get back to the strike. I have completely and continue support Russia, the Russian Federation, in this direct war of the United States against Russia, which began at the end of World War II, in my opinion. I've documented this in several of my films. It's very clear that the United States has wanted to take down the Soviet Union and then the new Russian Federation, which has got nothing to do with the old Soviet Union. Russia now is a hybrid capitalist country and is more than just President Putin. The Russian leadership involves very powerful oligarchs on one side who are capitalist, Western leaning, and the same number of oligarchs and academics who are really conservative, patriotic Russians. And Putin is in the middle. He's not an autocrat by any stretch. He's having to balance these powerful forces. And as we mentioned at the beginning, there are people in his inner circle like Karaganov and like Medvedev and many others, including the military, who are encouraging him to react more forcefully. And so I don't know what's going to happen in terms of how Putin will react. I do wish that he would learn a lesson from Iran, that the United States will not respond if Russia attacks one of their military bases in any of the countries we've talked about: Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Finland, Sweden, even Germany. But the thing that bothers me is that when we look at this conflict in Ukraine and the escalation on a regular basis, more and more egregious and lethal, Trump has not told Ukraine and the vassals in Europe to stand down. He has not done that. The only thing I can figure from that is that, number one, as you mentioned, Trump is not really in charge. And number two, whoever it is playing an extremely dangerous game. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think Trump or anybody who may be pulling the strings behind the scenes was ever interested in ending the war in Ukraine. I've been saying this until I'm blue in the face, Regis, and gradually over time, more and more people in the alternative media have come around to that view because it's just become so obvious. I mean, they're not even pretending now to be negotiating an end to the hostilities in Ukraine. Basically, they flushed that spectacle down the toilet. No one was buying it anymore, and Trump became distracted with Iran. Trump did something that all politicians, in Western legal political systems, and maybe this is something that's it's a universal principle of all politics since the invention of politics. They lie to get votes. They lie to get votes. Trump was confronted by an electorate in the last election in 2024 that was sick and tired, overwhelmingly, of forever wars. And Biden and the Democrats just ceded to the Republicans the peace argument. No one in the Democratic Party leadership was saying we should bring an end to the war in Ukraine. So all of the people out there who were sick of the genocide in Gaza, sick of Israel's aggression, sick of all the money being thrown down the NATO proxy war toilet in Ukraine, sick of all the killing on the battlefield in Ukraine, when they heard Trump say, hey, I'm going to bring the Ukraine war to an end in 24 hours, it was music to their ears. And a lot of people shifted their votes. Even some traditional Democrats did. A lot of people who are independents, a lot of people who typically don't vote at all, and people who are Republicans and who might not have been minded to go out and vote, even though they leaned Republican, ended up going to the ballot box, and Trump ended up winning by a wide margin, I think in substantial part because the United States electorate was so sick of forever wars, especially after watching what was going on in Gaza. But it was all a lie. Trump had no intention. The people who really pulled the strings of the US government have continuously sought global hegemony and have been demonstrating over and over again that they're willing to do anything and everything to achieve it. So as soon as Trump came to office, he appointed two shysters, or a shyster. Initially it was just Witkoff, a guy who doesn't know anything about Russia.
Yeah.
He knows nothing about Ukraine. He knows nothing about the history of, he knows nothing about arms control. He doesn't even have any sophistication in terms of sanctions. He's a real estate agent, okay, and lawyer in New York City. Okay, you wanna buy a piece of property in New York City? Steve Witkoff's your man. But negotiate an end to the Ukraine war? Are you kidding me? So that tells you all you need to know about the intentions of Trump. So it was a lie in Ukraine. It was a lie in Gaza. The genocide didn't end despite the so-called ceasefire and peace plan there. They say that there's a ceasefire in effect in Lebanon and Israel is murdering civilians every day. All of these negotiations that they say are taking place in Iran, kabuki theater. It's all kabuki theater. It is designed to do two things: to persuade Americans that Trump is trying to avoid another round of war when in fact he intends to pursue it. And secondly, it's intended to try and suppress the price of oil, because every time the press, Axios and NBC and ABC start reporting that they've sent a delegation to Tehran and they're on the verge of signing a peace agreement, the price of oil goes down. That's what this is all about. It's all kabuki theater.
I want to shift our attention now. We're still focusing on Donald Trump, but not forgetting who controls him. Iran. There's been a pause, I guess, in the fighting. Supposedly, Trump has told Netanyahu to calm down. I understand that Netanyahu is not happy. He wants the complete demolition of Iran, eradicate it from the face of the earth, because it's really the only country that's standing between Israel and the greater Israeli project. But here's the thing. As Trump has been threatening Iran constantly, as the negotiations have basically fallen apart, Iran is not backing down one bit from its, I think, 14 points that they expect the United States to agree to and that they can talk about. Trump, meanwhile, threatens. And he says, well, I'm waiting to see if we're going to get any kind of a reasonable proposal from Iran. But Dimitri, because you've been to Iran and you're analyzing the statements that are coming out from Iran. Iran has threatened that if Trump does begin the war against Iran again, that Trump, the United States, and Israel will see something they've never seen before. Dimitri, I read today, they also have indicated that if it begins again, Iran will spread this not just to the Gulf, but the entire region of West Asia. And finally, Dimitri, I don't know if it's true or not, but I saw one podcast, the very credible, I think, podcast. They got something like 6 million subscribers, and within a few hours, they got over 1 million views. And this is every single day. They reported today that Iran has even threatened Donald Trump himself, basically saying, He's not safe anywhere. Dimitri, what do you make of it?
Well, let me just go back to what you said at the beginning of your question about this report that Trump is upset with Netanyahu. That was from Axios. It was an article written by Barak Ravid, who has become the Trump regime's go-to person in the corporate media for basically spreading whatever messages the Trump regime wants to spread. And he worked years ago. He's an Israeli, and he worked in the infamous Israeli intelligence gathering unit 8200. And every time he reports on these developments, he's always relying upon unnamed sources. Okay, so he said that they had a call, and it was a very tense call, Trump and Netanyahu, because Netanyahu said these negotiations are not going to lead to anything, and Trump is saying, give peace a chance. And the words that were used in the Barak Ravid article is that Bibi's hair was on fire. Okay, this was about 2 or 3 days ago. I'm going to read to you a headline from an article in the Times of Israel in February 2024. And the headline is, Biden reportedly fed up with Netanyahu, calling him a-hole over management of war. I could give you plenty of articles like this, by the way, where based on unnamed sources, Israeli or American media or both, claim that there's tensions between the White House and Netanyahu. And this is done for basically one reason. To go back to what I said, it's done to convey to the American electorate the false impression that the White House is trying to avoid more war, when in fact it is stoking more war. Throughout this whole time that we were hearing occasionally that Biden was really upset with Netanyahu, Biden was sending massive amount of weapons to Israel. He never stopped doing that. He never imposed any consequences on Israel for its heinous crimes. He enabled them. So I don't believe for 1 second this report that there's real tensions between Trump and I didn't believe this Biden-Netanyahu nonsense back then, and I don't believe it now. And I don't think anybody should take it seriously. I think they're on the same page. And just today, by the way, 2 articles I want to mention. There was an article in the last 24 hours in the Israeli press where the military censor in Israel reportedly allowed the Israeli press to publish some satellite images of Israeli military bases that were damaged by Iran and Hezbollah during March and early April, before this so-called ceasefire came into effect. The images were so blurred that you really couldn't tell what damage had been done, but it was the text of the article that was key. And the text cited somebody described as a very senior source inside the Israeli military, saying that this is going to be a long war and there are going to be multiple rounds to this war. And we're just in the early phases, and we need to condition the Israeli public for what's coming. That's why they allowed these blurry images to be published. The message was, look, the Iranians have the ballistic missile capability to strike our military bases, so we have to continue the war. And another report that just came out today, I don't know whether to believe it or not, but apparently Donald Trump not only canceled golf, he was supposed to go to his son's wedding, which I think was in Florida, and he decided he was going to stay in Washington. That doesn't sound too good. And we all know that they're building up forces in the region. That is for sure. That is absolutely for sure that the United States is building up its forces in the region and has been to an insane degree throughout this so-called ceasefire. So I think the war is coming again. It's just a matter of time. I do think that Trump would readily destroy Iran by non-military means if he could. I don't think he can. He's going to, other than nuking Iran, I don't think he can destroy Iran, by the way. But I think he would prefer to do it in a way that isn't going to blow up the entire region. But it's becoming apparent to him that he can't. He can't destroy Iran by imposing a blockade on its ports, by imposing, maximum pressure sanctions, by constantly threatening Iran by wagging his tongue. That's not going to stop the Iranians. Their negotiating position has remained essentially the same. And I don't see any indication that Trump is willing to make any concession to Iran, let alone all the concessions that Iran has been demanding. So there is, I think, highly likely going to be another round of war, and the Iranians will escalate. I actually interviewed the acting foreign minister of Yemen about a month ago, and I asked him about the Bab el Mandeb Strait. Will they close it? And he said, ultimately, we will make that decision. But we stand in solidarity with our Iranian brothers, and we aren't going to allow the United States to destroy Iran. We are going to do what we deem necessary to help. And they have demonstrated the ability to, by the way, they never shut down the Bab al-Mandab Strait completely. What they did was they stopped vessels that were complicit, Israeli vessels, Israeli-linked vessels, and other vessels that were doing commerce with Israel from going through the strait. And then Iran says that they can actually cut very, very important undersea cables, which are used for the transmission of data, for internet services not just in the region of West Asia, but outside the region as well. And they do have the ability, Regis. They have ballistic missiles with a range of 2,000 kilometers. That means they can strike the British military base on the southern coast of Cyprus called Akrotiri, which has been used to funnel huge amounts of weapons to Israel. It's also been used to attack Yemen. It has been used to send spy planes over Gaza while Israel was murdering civilians there. And they can also strike the Suda military base in Crete, the Greek island of Crete. That is within range. So as to the question of whether they're going to try to take out Trump, I saw a report today which claimed that the Iranians actually tried to kill Ivanka Trump. I'm not sure if that's the report you're referring to, which frankly I found ludicrous. I just think that's ridiculous. I think, why would they try to kill the woman that Donald Trump divorced many years ago? I think they have better things to do with their time than that. I think that's just a way of whipping up hysteria in the United States.
Well, you mentioned something very important, because I read that Iran said that if the United States, Donald Trump, attacked Iran again, Iran would make sure that the Bab el-Mandab Strait was shut down, and they were willing because it's an existential crisis. It's about the future, their existence as a 5,000-year-old civilization. They are willing to continue the collapse of the global economy. Mm-hmm. And Dimitri, you mentioned cutting those underground cables. Oh my God. Very little has been said about that. But by doing that, it's cutting off all of the internet communications capability, not only in the region, but if I'm not mistaken, all across the EU. And I don't know how far that goes, but can you confirm whether or not you think that's true, that Iran did say that? I mean, it's basically, to me, saying, okay, Donald Trump, okay, the powers that be, if you're ready to do this, we are going to fight with everything else that we have. And after you answer that, I have one last question for you, and it's a big one.
Iran definitely did say that they are prepared to cut those cables. That is for sure. They've been very clear about that. They definitely did say that they are going to expand the war beyond the region of West Asia. And they definitely did say, we are going to ask our friends in Yemen to shut down the Bab al-Mandab Strait. Another thing they said in connection with those cables is that an alternative to destroying them is to impose fees on the internet cables. This was a statement on X by Iranian military spokesperson Ibrahim Zolfagadi last week. He said that Tehran plans to extract revenue from the strait by requiring companies like Google, Microsoft, Meta, and Amazon to comply with Iranian law, while submarine cable companies would be required to pay licensing fees for cable passage, with repair and maintenance rights given exclusively to Iranian firms. But they've gone further than that, and they've said that they may actually destroy them. So we have not seen anywhere near the worst of this war. We just, I mean, this thing, I think this thing's, it's just terrible, but I think this thing's just heating up. By the way, the International Energy Agency came out, I think about 3 days ago, and said by July, if the strait remains restricted to more or less to the current degree of restriction, through to July, that we are going to enter code red in the global oil supply. At that point, there's going to be massive shortages of oil and gas in the global economy, and countries are going to start to shut down. The way they've been avoiding that up until now is they've been releasing huge amounts of strategic petroleum reserves.
Yeah.
And the United States started the war the incompetence of these people boggles the mind. The strategic petroleum reserve at the United States was unusually low when they began the war. So this is not even close to as bad as it's going to get.
Well, it's already bad in terms of the global supply chain being disrupted because of the straits being closed. They're talking about starvation in large numbers in the global south. They're talking about a collapse of the global economy. And if it goes any further, that the straits of Bab el-Mandeb are closed, basically that is not just a choke point, it's a stranglehold on the entire global economy. Now, Dimitri, I've been wanting to ask you this question. And I know you don't know. I don't think anybody knows. But Russia and China made some very public comments about not allowing the hegemon to continue doing the things that it's been doing unlawfully, unrestrained around the world. The question that some of us have been asking, in order to provide Iran with a defense, a real defense, do you think that Russia and China would have provided them with a nuclear weapon as a means of deterrence?
I don't think they have to, I'm relying here upon the expertise of Theodore Postel, the professor emeritus of MIT, who's one of the foremost weapons experts in the United States. And he's been saying for months that Iran has the capability itself already to develop 10 to 20 atomic weapons using its own technology and its own capability. It's 2 or 3 weeks away from taking the enriched uranium, which currently is about 60%, up to weapons grade, which is over 90%. That is a step he says they can do in a matter of a few weeks. He said that they have the delivery vehicles, they have ballistic missiles, they know how to arm them with powerful warheads. And he said he thinks that they could put together a small nuclear arsenal in a matter of a couple of months. And frankly, they might have already done it. So I don't think that Russia and China need to assist them, just based upon he lays out in considerable detail the technical analysis that underpins his judgment. So he's not just blowing smoke. So I urge people, if they're interested in watching that, Iran may already have nuclear weapons. And by the way, the Iranian supreme leader said 2 days ago that the enriched uranium is not leaving Iran. They're not going anywhere. They're not even willing to leave it in the custody of Russia or China anymore.
Yeah.
So that's an ominous sign. I do think that the Chinese and the Russians have, I'm not going to do what a lot of people in the alternative media do and sound like I know what assistance they've been giving, because I don't. They've been very, very guarded about what assistance they're giving to Iran. But I will say with a high degree of confidence that they have a powerful incentive to help Iran and ensure that Iran does not fall to the United States. If Iran falls, Regis, then the United States will have unchallenged control over the resources and trade routes of all of West Asia. And that's a disaster. That's a strategic disaster for China, which relies upon resources from this region, as do many of its trading partners. Can you just imagine if there was a vassal of Washington in power in Tehran? How long would it be before you'd see drones flying from the Iranian coastline of the Caspian Sea across the Caspian into the south of Russia? How long would it be? Not too long, in my opinion. They would be using Iran as a launching pad for striking Russia in its strategic rear from the south. So this would be an unmitigated strategic catastrophe for Russia and China if the United States controlled Iran again, as it did after it overthrew Mohammad Mossadegh in the 1950s. So I don't know what assistance they're giving, but I believe they have a very, very powerful incentive to give Iran a lot of assistance.
All right, Dimitri, we're back. We had an interruption there. You know, this is happening to me too often, and I don't believe that it's accidental anymore. But anyway, I don't want to get into that. I do appreciate your comments about maybe the fact that Iran may already have nuclear weapons or could certainly produce them within a couple of weeks. I think the sentiment in Iran with the hardliners, with the military, even with the new Ayatollah, the decree against Iran having a nuclear weapon may have been put aside. I don't know, but Iran is looking at future existence or not. And why wouldn't they resort to developing a nuclear weapon as a matter of deterrence, just like North Korea has done? Now, I want to finish on this. Dimitri, I'm scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Your Substack, Reason to Resist, is one of the best, most informative, complete Substacks that people should follow. I encourage people to visit your website, Dimitri, to make sure that they subscribe, and not only subscribe, that like the reports that you've been making for the last couple of years, but Dimitri, especially in the last few months since this war broke out. But even prior to the war, there's nobody that has covered the genocidal Israeli regime attacking Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon. You've reported from there on the ground. I want to encourage everybody to go to your website and to subscribe and to support your efforts. In my opinion, Dimitri, in my opinion, you have very few peers in reporting what's happening in these critical places in Ukraine, in Iran, and even in the United States. Dimitri, thank you so much for always being available to come on my little peepsqueak show when so many others would not even consider it.
Oh, you're doing great work, my brother, and you're very kind. Thank you so much for your kind words, and it's always a privilege to talk to you, Regis.